In January 1847, Brigham Young received a revelation at winter quarters that was subsequently canonized in Latter-day Saint scripture as Doctrine and Covenants, section 136. Because this, the only canonized revelation of Brigham Young, begins by addressing the camp of Israel in their journeyings to the west, Latter-day Saints often gloss over it as simply a how-to guide for organizing pioneer companies. The revelation, however, has had a profound but largely overlooked impact upon the Latter-day Saints for nearly 175 years. Understanding the who, what, when, where, and why of the revelation can help Latter-day Saints today just as much as it helped those who traveled the Great Plains over the Mormon Trail. Although the revelation contains specific organizational guidelines, more importantly, it helped refocus Brigham and the Latter-day Saints on the importance of the covenants they had made. It also served as a reminder that both personal salvation and the progress of the church were dependent upon being on the covenant path and hearkening to the word and will of the Lord. The lessons that Brigham learned because of the revelation influenced his actions as the American Moses gathering the Latter-day Saints. The revelations were a major reason that those who traveled the Mormon Trail regularly did so in a different manner than those who traveled other trails. The lessons also aided Brigham in his role as the American Joshua, guiding the saints after they reached their, quote, promised land. When Brigham made the decision for the Latter-day Saints to begin leaving Nauvoo in February 1846, bitter cold, he fully expected to lead a company of approximately 300 men to their new home in the West that year. His goal was to arrive early enough to grow crops that would sustain the thousands of Latter-day Saints who would subsequently join them before the year was out. Instead of reaching the Great Basin, however, his company struggled to make it across Iowa. Rather than taking 4 to 5 weeks to reach the Missouri River as anticipated, that portion of the journey had taken more than 4 months. The delay in part was the result of heavy rains that caused streams and rivers to rise significantly above normal levels and turn rolling plains into muddy quagmires. Iowa's mud and swollen rivers would have been less problematic if the advance company had not been joined by more than 1,000 others, an unwieldy number that further slowed its progress. Many of these saints had left Nauvoo ahead of schedule, and a large number were ill-prepared for their journey. When the advance company finally reached the Missouri River, their energies and supplies were largely spent. As a result, they were forced to find a place to winter and try again the following year. The delays and the disappointment of not reaching their destination, along with the responsibility and toil of having to oversee the needs of thousands of saints scattered across Iowa and the Missouri River, while at the same time having to make preparations for another immigration season, made the first 7 months of winter quarters among the most difficult of Brigham's life. The stress of leading the church under these circumstances caused him to write at the time that he, quote, felt like a father with a great family of children around him, and later recalled that his responsibilities pressed down upon him like a 25-ton weight. The Latter-day Saints at this time had literally and figuratively become stuck in the mud, and Brigham needed wisdom on how to extricate the church. Though the journey across Iowa and the stresses associated with having to establish winter quarters had weakened Brigham physically, these experiences helped prepare him and the saints to receive the word and will of the Lord at a time when it would be both welcomed and embraced. On January 14th, 1847, after months of worry, counsels, and prayers, Brigham received the answers he needed to move the work forward. Most of the principles in the Revelation had previously been revealed to Joseph Smith or could be found in ancient scriptures. In 1847, however, because these precepts were brought together into one revelation and because Brigham was simultaneously being taught by the Spirit, the revelation became an aha moment for him. As his subsequent actions demonstrated, the message he took away from the revelatory process was that modern Israel, like ancient Israel, had become lost in the wilderness because they had not always embraced the word and will of the Lord. In short, they had not made as much progress as they had hoped because they were not doing things the Lord's way. Having received his errand from the Lord, The revelation became a foundational document for Brigham. It provided him a vision of what was required of the Latter-day Saints, and he immediately went to work to try and implant the same vision in their hearts and minds. In addition to providing Brigham the inspiration he needed to put the church back on track, the revelation served as a powerful reminder to Brigham and the saints that because they were on the Lord's errand, he did not expect them to carry out his work without his help. As a result of the revelation, there was an immediate and noticeable change. The gloom and despair that hung over the Latter-day Saint communities gave way to a new hope. As William Clayton observed, it truly seemed as though the cloud had burst and we had emerged into a new element, a new atmosphere, and a new society. As instructed in the revelation, Brigham immediately went to work organizing immigrating companies with captains of hundreds, captains of 50s, and captains in tens, with the president and his 2 counselors at their head. While this organization pattern had been previously put in place, in 1846 the structure had not always been viewed as important. Now in 1847, the need for the saints to be organized in the Lord's way became so important that even before Brigham began dictating the revelation, he sent out instructions on how to organize companies for immigration. By employing the revelation's organizational pattern, the day-to-day responsibility of the saints now rested with company presidents and captains, thus freeing up Brigham and the 12 to provide general leadership for the church. In addition to giving a renewed emphasis to this aspect of company organization, Brigham implemented 2 other important organizational principles. First, there would be a limit placed on the size of Latter-day Saint companies. Second, once an individual became a member of a specific company, they were expected to remain in that company throughout the journey. The latter policy was a marked departure from the fluidity of company membership that had been an aspect of the Latter-day Saint exodus across Iowa and would continue to be a common practice among non-Latter-day Saint immigrants. The fact that the church was organized according to the word of the Lord mattered little if the saints' behavior also did not collectively reflect the will of the Lord. A second significant aspect of the revelation was the Lord's declaration that the 12 had the collective responsibility to teach this my will to the saints. In this regard, the revelation served as a forceful reminder to Brigham that the 12 had a similar charge to that given to Moses. Thou shalt teach them ordinances and laws, and shalt shew them the way wherein they must walk, and the work that they must do. While many saints had willfully ignored counsel in 1846, there were also a large number who had not been sufficiently taught what was expected of them. Following the revelation, Brigham immediately went to work to ensure that the 12 fully understood the Lord's will. Having taught them their responsibilities, Brigham then informed church members that the 12 would, quote, communicate with, instruct, and counsel you as they shall be directed by the Holy Spirit. And we call upon you to give heed to their admonition in all things, which if you do, ye shall find peace and rest and safety and prosperity. The word and will of the Lord also declared that the saints had a collective responsibility to bear an equal portion according to the dividend of their property in assisting those in need, among whom were the families of the Mormon battalion. Regarding them, Brigham instructed the leaders of the companies that followed the Vanguard Company in 1847 that they were to take as many of these families as possible, so that when the former battalion members reached the Salt Lake Valley, they, quote, will bless us, greet their families with thanksgiving, and immediately go to planting, plowing, and sowing, instead of being obliged to walk back hundreds of miles after their long and tedious journey, wasting their flesh and blood and bones to no purpose, end of quote. Sadly, these companies took fewer families than Brigham had hoped, and more than 30 battalion members returned to the Missouri River in the fall of 1847 in order to be reunited with their families. The revelation also had an influence upon how the Latter-day Saint settlements in Iowa developed. declaring that before individuals went west in 1847, they first had an obligation to go to with their might and assist those who are to tarry by building houses and preparing fields of grain. In addition to setting Latter-day Saints to work strengthening these communities, Brigham also looked ahead to the 1848 immigration by having men gather and season timber so that there would be sufficient lumber to begin to build wagons. In 1875, after a quarter century of stressing the importance of ministering to others, Brigham declared, "The Latter-day Saints have got to learn that the interest of their brethren is their own interest, or they can never be saved in the celestial kingdom of God." Central to the revelation was the reminder that the Latter-day Saints were covenant people and that the covenant path was an essential part of the Lord's work. In verse 2, the Lord declared that the Latter-day Saints were to continue with their exodus with a covenant and promise to keep all the commandments and statutes of the Lord our God. In verse 4, the word and will stated that this shall be our covenant, that we will walk in all the ordinances of the Lord. Shortly after establishing winter quarters, Brigham had written that it was essential for the salvation of the church for a vanguard company to reach the Salt Lake Valley early enough in 1847 to begin growing crops. Following the revelation, his declarations stressed that behavior more than location was the most essential thing for the salvation and destiny of the church and its members. He would emphasize to the vanguard company that their duty extended beyond just blazing a trail that others would follow in the coming months and years. They also had the responsibility to see that the Mormon trail was established in harmony with the revealed word of the Lord and consistent with the Lord's covenant path. The word and will of the Lord emphatically reminded the saints that their ultimate success was dependent upon him. "I am he who led the children of Israel out of the land of Egypt, and my arm is stretched out in the last days to save my people Israel." Besides making a direct tie between the exodus of modern and ancient Israel, the revelation provided the Latter-day Saints a connection to the journey of the Book of Mormon prophets Lehi and Nephi, during which the Lord declared, "I will prepare the way before you, if it so be that ye shall keep my commandments. Wherefore, inasmuch as ye shall keep my commandments, ye shall be led towards the promised land, and ye shall know that it is by me that ye are led." Section 136's references to ordinances and covenants and obedience brought a new understanding and renewed energy. Brigham fully embraced the fact that the Latter-day Saints not only had the responsibility to undertake the journey in a different manner, they also had the privilege. For Brigham, the success of the 1847 Vanguard Company was now less dependent upon maps and wagons and supplies than upon company members aligning their efforts with the word and will of the Lord. To accomplish the task before them, spiritual preparation was as important as physical preparation, and personal behavior as personal property. While Brigham may have had concerns during his travels across Iowa as to how the saints would succeed, he was certain, following the revelation, that if the saints were striving to keep their covenants and living according to the revealed word, they couldn't fail, even if they again encountered circumstances beyond their control. Believing that they could bind the Lord to help them because of their faithfulness, Brigham declared that he, quote, did not want any to join the Vanguard Company unless they would obey the word and will of the Lord. Although a shortage of food had been an issue in 1846, in 1847, Brigham believed that if the saints were striving to fulfill their part of their covenants, food and supplies did not need to be a primary concern. Within days of receiving the revelation, he publicly proclaimed that he had not cattle sufficient to go to the mountains, but had no more doubts nor fears of going to the mountains, and felt as much security as if he possessed the treasures of the east. Kind of as a side note, he would publicly declare and emphasize this point that each member of the Vanguard Company only needed to take with them 100 pounds of food, declaring that all who had not faith to start with that amount should remain behind. On May 23rd, a month into the Vanguard Company's journey from winter quarters, some company members expressed fears that they might not reach their destination in time to grow crops. To these concerns, Brigham responded, "Well, suppose we do not," and I've changed the words a little here. "We have done all we could and traveled as fast as our team were able to go. And when we have done all we could, I feel as well satisfied as if we had 1,000 acres planted with grain. The Lord would do the rest." Brigham's faith allowed him to proclaim at the time, "I never felt clearer in my mind than on this journey. My peace is like a river between my God and myself." While there was an overall reformation in behavior, at times Brigham found himself frustrated with some members of the Vanguard Company who he felt were, quote, forgetting their mission. On one occasion, after he read the word and will of the Lord to the company, he told them that he, quote, would rather travel with 10 righteous men who would keep the commandments of God than the whole camp while in a careless manner and forgetting God. Ultimately, the 1847 experiences of the advance company stood in dramatic contrast to the previous year's journey. Brigham attributed the difference to the Lord keeping his promise to lead and help them because of their efforts, although those efforts were far from perfect, to align their will with his. On August 26, 1847, after a brief stay in the Salt Lake Valley, Brigham began retracing the Mormon Trail back to the Missouri River. On his return trip, he encountered the companies that had been organized according to the revelation before he left. To his dismay, they were no longer traveling as they had been organized. And as a result, there had been many problems along the way. More troubling to Brigham was the fact that they were led by 2 members of the 12, Parley P. Pratt and John Taylor. While neither Pratt nor Taylor had been at winter quarters when the revelation was received and Brigham began to be implemented, Brigham had taught them its importance. However, as the companies were getting ready to leave, Pratt had decided to ignore aspects of the revelation, declaring, quote, "Theory is not what we will see now so much as the practical," end quote. Upon learning what had happened, Brigham could not hide his frustrations. For him, the word of the Lord was not theory, it was the practical approach. And he chastised Pratt and Taylor. "Our companies were perfectly organized. I know you have had a hard time, but you have brought it on yourself." Another important aspect of the revelation was the Lord's reminder that Zion shall be redeemed in my own due time. Because Brigham was so anxious to get to the Great Basin, he had not fully embraced what Joseph Smith had told him in a dream prior to leaving Nauvoo. And this is taken from Brigham's journal. This is what he wrote about that dream. Joseph told him, "Brother Brigham, don't be in a hurry." This was repeated the second and third time when it came with a degree of sharpness. To ancient Israel, the Lord had made a similar declaration. "For ye shall not go out with haste, nor go by flight, for the Lord will go before you, and the God of Israel shall be your rearward." Having comprehended the importance of this lesson while pausing at winter quarters for a season, Brigham counseled members of the Mormon battalion preparing to leave the Salt Lake Valley in 1847 for their long-anticipated reunion with their families along the Missouri River not to make the same mistake he had made the previous year. And I love how Brigham phrases this. Whoops, that was it. "Do not give way to an over-anxious spirit, so that your spirits arrive at winter quarters before the time that your bodies can possibly arrive there." In addition to establishing an organizational pattern, helping to define the role of the Quorum of the 12, stressing the need to minister to others, emphasizing the importance of obedience and covenants, and reminding modern Israel about the need to let God prevail, the revelation also declared, "Let him that is ignorant learn wisdom by humbling himself and calling upon the Lord his God, that his eyes may be opened that he may see, and his ears opened that he may hear." As with other aspects of the revelation, Brigham readily embraced this admonition. Shortly before his death, he acknowledged that his accomplishments in gathering tens of thousands of Latter-day Saints and establishing hundreds of communities were not the result of his talents and abilities. What I know, I have received from the heavens, not through my natural ability, and I give God the glory and the praise. Men talk about what has been accomplished under my direction and attribute it to my wisdom and ability, but it is all by the power of God and by the intelligence received from him. On another occasion, he stated, and this may be one of my favorite Brigham Young quotes, "I think there is more responsibility on myself than any other man on this earth pertaining to the salvation of the human family. Yet my path is a pleasant path to walk. All I have to do is to live so as to keep my spirit, feelings, and conscience like a sheet of blank paper, and let the Spirit and power of God write upon it what he pleases. When he writes, I will read, but if I read before he writes, I am very likely to do wrong." In summary, as a result of D&C 136, Brigham received the answers he needed to put the church back on track at a pivotal time in its history. Having proven for himself along the Mormon Trail in 1847 that the saints were better off heeding the word and will of the Lord, he never forgot the lessons he learned because of his revelations. His lifelong focus upon the benefits of covenants and the importance of hearkening to the word and will of the Lord caused the anxiety he initially felt at winter quarters to fade away. In later life, he reported that he found himself full of peace by day and by night, and that he slept as soundly as a healthy child in the lap of its mother. The lessons that Brigham learned as a result of Section 136 remain relevant for Latter-day Saints. While the journey may be different today, the underlying principles remain the same as they did at the time that Brigham and the saints established the Mormon Trail. When understood in context, the revelation is a powerful reminder that the Lord is willing and able to help all those on their own journey who hearken to his word and will. Thank you.